Sebentar lagi acara berikutnya akan kami mulai. Apabila Bapak dan Ibu belum selesai untuk menghabiskan makan siang, kami persilahkan untuk membawanya ke meja dan tetap menikmatinya di meja masing-masing. Jadi sekali lagi kami undang untuk mengambil makanannya dan menikmatinya di dalam ruangan. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to moving on to our next program. If you happen to haven't finished your lunch, kindly bring your lunch to the table and enjoy your lunch on your table. Jadi kami undang sekali lagi ibu bapak sekalian untuk mengambil makanan, dessertnya, minumnya ke dalam ruangan dan menikmatinya di dalam ruangan karena acara kita akan mulai tepat jam 1.15. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to take your lunch into the conference room and enjoy it while we are moving on to our next program. Thank you. Ibu bapak sekalian yang kami hormati, kami undang untuk kembali memasuki ruang konferensi. Silahkan dibawa serta makanan, dessert, dan minumannya apabila belum selesai. Kami persilahkan karena keterbatasan waktu dan banyak sekali hal-hal yang ingin kami sampaikan kepada Anda. Kita akan benar-benar memulai acara sesuai dengan jadwal. Jadi kami mengajak Ibu Bapak sekalian memasuki ruangan, membawa makanan dan minuman dan menyelesaikan makan siangnya di dalam ruangan. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to enter the conference room. We are about to begin our next discussion. If you haven't finished your lunch yet, please take your lunch to your table and enjoy your lunch on your table. Thank you. Ibu Bapak yang kami hormati, sambil kita menunggu dimulainya sesi diskusi yang berikutnya, kami informasikan dan kami juga mengundang Ibu Bapak untuk memperoleh sertifikat elektronik dengan cara memasukkan nomor token 011222 di daftar hadir pada akun LMS Anda. Kami juga akan meminta Ibu dan Bapak untuk kembali memasukkan nomor token kehadiran beberapa kali selama konferensi ini berlangsung. Dan pastikan Ibu dan Bapak mengikuti seluruh agenda kegiatan dan mengisi token dengan lengkap. Seperti yang kita ketahui, di sesi siang hari ini kita akan ada panel diskusi bersama pembicara kita dan akan diteruskan dengan presentasi berikutnya. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Apologies for the delay, and I hope you enjoyed your lunch. And moving on to the following agenda, we will have some experts. We'll be discussing the merits of approaches taken in the case studies while identifying successes and challenges in the valuation and compensation. And also, the compensation of unregistered and customary lands, including data, risk, betterment, social value, and intangible assets. The panel discussion theme we have is how can we better manage valuation and compensation of unregistered and customary land. We have 5 panelists here. Profesor Dr. Insinyur Nur Azam Aksani, Bogor Agricultural Institute, ATR BPN. We also have Mr. Satoshi Ishihara, Senior Social Development Specialist, World Bank. And also Ibu Renggani Skartomo, former chair and member of Indonesia Valuation Standards Board, KPSPI MAPI. Mr. Benjamin Alder, head of valuation of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. And also, last but not least, Mr. Mike McDermott, International Valuation and Land Policy Implementation Consultant. And this discussion will be led by our remarkable moderator, Ms. Prita Laura. Please welcome Ms. Prita Laura.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome again to this room for our next discussion. As we know that unregistered land rights may account for more than 70% of land rights in developing countries. Acquisition of these types of land has never been easy across countries, as we heard before in the discussion. But the challenge is all the more critical now. This is because, as we all know, climate adaptation and shift in global value chain means that a lot more infrastructure needs to be built outside where tenure rights are clearly established and documented. We need to find a better way so that land acquisition goes smoothly without causing social dispute, and the critical infrastructure can be built without delay. On the other hand, the case studies presented in the previous session clearly shows a clear trend. Many countries are experimenting ways to address the common challenges in different ways, but we have not shared experience with each other, which limit our ability to innovate. So in this panel discussion, we'd like to ask ourselves the following question. How can we learn from the experience from different countries, and how we can improve the way we do the land acquisition of unregistered and customary land?
Untuk tanah yang
What
belum
are innovation
teregistrasi
out
dan
there
tanah
that we
adat?
could learn
Apa saja
from,
inovasi
and
di luar
how
sana
can we
yang
adapt
dapat
them
kita
in
pelajari
our own
dan
country
bagaimana kita
context?
dapat
Before
mengadaptasinya
I
sesuai dengan
introduce our
kondisi di
distinguished
negara kita.
panelists, a bit of housekeeping. We will have time for
Dan sedikit pengumuman, Bapak Ibu, nanti
Q&A from the
akan ada
floor
sesi tanya
and
jawab
also online. Please use
dan
the
ini
Slido.
dibuka untuk peserta
We will
online dan
pick few
offline.
top
Jadi kalau ada
rated
pertanyaan
question and also
silakan
few
disampaikan
question from
melalui
the
Slido.
participant who
Nanti
join
kami akan
online
pilih
today.
beberapa pertanyaan yang
And
paling banyak
with that,
di
let me
voting.
introduce our
Dan
5
tanpa menunda lebih
esteemed
lanjut, saya
panelists for
ingin
today.
mengundang 5 orang panelis
Please
di siang
welcome
hari ini.
Ibu
Mari kita
Rengganis
sambut Ibu
Kartomo,
Rengganis
former
Kartomo,
chair and member of the Indonesian Valuation
selaku
Standard Board.
ketua dan
Ibu
juga
Rengganis,
anggota
please
dari
welcome to join with
KSPI
us.
MAFI. Ibu Rengganis,
Let's we
silakan.
give applause to Ibu Rengganis
Mari kita beri
Kartomo.
tepuk tangan untuk Ibu Rengganis Kartomo.
And again, we would like
Dan sekali lagi,
welcome Professor Nur Azam Azani, Dean of the Faculty of Business and Economics and the Institute of Agricultural Bogor. Please welcome. And also Mr.
dan selain itu saya juga
Satoshi
ingin
Ishihara,
mengundang
Senior
Bapak
Social
Satoshi
Development
Ishihara
Specialist at
selaku
the World
Senior
Bank.
Social Development
Please
Specialist
welcome.
di Bank Dunia.
And Mr. Benjamin Elder, Head
Bapak
of
Ibu, mohon maaf,
Valuation
saat
of the
ini
Royal
sedang
Institution
ada
of
sedikit gangguan pada
Chartered
sistem penerjemahan.
Surveyors
Akan kami atasi dan
International. Please
kami lanjutkan
welcome.
kembali penerjemahan sesegera mungkin.
And Mr. Mike McDermott, International Valuation and Land Policy Implementation Consultant. Please welcome. Yeah, thank you for being here.
Terima kasih karena sudah bergabung.
Okay, this will be a
Baik.
discussion without a presentation, as I know. Yeah. First, I would like to ask Ms. Rengganis first. Hello, Ibu Rengganis.
Hai Mbak Brita.
As an experienced appraiser, valuation
Sebagai
is
seorang penilai
key to
publik,
land acquisition. And for the proper valuation of unregistered and customary lands, how critical is the availability of reliable data? Or the lack thereof. Could you please elaborate on that? Because you know the challenges data provide for the unregistered and customary land.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, and it's been a pleasure to sit here with other distinguished panelists and discuss this big topic. Okay, so to answer your question, that's actually a very valid question in general valuation practice actually. And especially if we discuss the situation in Indonesia, that we do not have the property data center, unlike in Malaysia with NEPIC or in Singapore or in the Western countries. But as a valuer, we have to rely on our own database that consists of the basically offering price, because we do not have this mechanism to report transaction that happen in the market. So there is no mechanism to self-declare your transaction. So as a valuer, we have this offering data that adjusted to reflect the market value. On the other hand, actually, now that we have the National Land Agency that could capture the information of the price, or we call it transacted price, as reported or as captured by the PPAT, that's like the landed official, pejabat pembuat akta tanah. But usually because this price is related with the tax obligation, so it is usually lower than the than the actual price. So that's the situation. So in the area of this unregistered land, but good news is that if you mentioned that 70% of land in the, I think that's in Ghana, is 70% unregistered. Indonesia is the other way around, because based on the information given by the Bu Embun, actually 65% of land parcels in Indonesia already registered.
Okay, yes, very good.
That's outside the forest land, So we only deal with the 35% that could comprise of the customary land and the non-registered land, but this could be like, recognizable right, like GIRIC or letter C, or this non-recognizable right, such as the squatter land, or land that basically people who live there has no right at all. So data is one problem, but I think we must address two classification of data. So for the physical components, of course, we have to deal with comparables, but if we have to deal for this customary land, especially the non-physical component, such as social value, loss of jobs, etc., then there is another data that captured from social economic study. That's my take
How
on
do you
that.
find a reliable data? Which one which one is reliable or not?
Of course, if we have a database, if we have many data, then we could have like the range of reasonableness of data. So if we have this National Land Agency initiative to have a map, cadastral map, that could provide the transaction data for, say, registered, maybe there's 82 million parcels. That will be like a valuable information for valuation service in Indonesia.
Okay.
For now, we just rely on our own database, and that creates valuation risk, in terms of the accuracy and the validity of the data.
In your experience, is there any, do you also recognize data that beyond the data that database that you have before, that you mentioned before? Because as we know that it's about customary land and also unregistered land, there are many data that told by stories and not written, and no one as a witness of it. Based on your experience, do you also recognize that?
Difficulties in assessing that. So actually this is based on the experience with New Jogja Airport, the land expropriation in that case. So if we define the property right of the Sultan ground, then we make assumption that is a freehold right. Of course, that will be different based on type of the customary land. So basically customary land will not have market value, but we make assumption as if that is marketable. Because if we compare, then maybe other than the marketability, actually it could not be collateralized or put as a mortgage. So that's the weakness of this customary land.
Okay, thank you for your answer, thank you. Let's talk about data again later, but I will switch to Mr. Satoshi Ishihara. Still on the same question, Mr. Satoshi, you have been working large-scale infrastructure projects that require large-scale land acquisition. And what are the challenges you experience in obtaining data that can capture socio-economic impacts of the affected communities?
Thank you very much. Actually, I would like to turn the question to Pak Mutakin, who has done a large infrastructure project, because data is a very big issue. But I think it's good that if we're able to elaborate a little bit based on the project that we already heard about. So maybe I can turn the question to Pak Mutakin, is it okay?
Okay, Pak Mutakin, would you like to explain about it? Yeah. Yeah, I think the microphone already on, Pak. Iya.
Tes.
Ya.
Nyala ya. Oke. Baik, jadi saya langsung ngambil kasus Bandara Jogja.
Iya.
Bandara Jogja itu karena keistimewaan Jogja, tanah di sana di bandara itu kan ada tanah Kadipaten Land sama Sultan Land. Nah, semua data sebenarnya tercatat di desa. Nah, sehingga di awal pada saat kita melakukan penilaian untuk tanah adat itu kan masuk tanah adat ya, Sultan dan Mantu. Nah, itu pendataan awal adalah di desa. Jadi semua siapa yang menghuni di atas tanah di atas tanah Kasultanan dan Kadipaten itu terdaftar semua di desa. Siapa namanya, memegang surat apa, ketitir atau kekancingan atau anggaduh, itu semua ada di desa. Nah, sehingga pada saat awal peran desa menjadi sangat penting di dalam memperoleh data sosial ekonomi tadi. Karena di situ tercatat siapa digunakan untuk apa. Nah, itu ada semua di situ. Nah, bahkan sekarang berdasar peraturan Menteri ATR BPN nomor 2 tahun 2022 mengenai pendaftaran tanah di Jogja, pendaftaran tanah Kasultanan dan Kadipaten itu menjadi suatu tantangan bagi kita. Sebelum melakukan penilaian tanah di Jogja, kita sebaiknya meminta data ke desa. Ini tanahnya masuk di atas tanah Kadipaten atau tanah Kasultanan tidak, atau memang berdiri di atas tanah negara. Nah, itu menjadi sangat penting gitu. Nah, sehingga data di desa cukup lengkap, sehingga di dalam pembebasan lahan untuk Bandara Jogja, peran desa menjadi sangat penting di dalam memberikan data yang clear bagi siapa yang akan dibebaskan, begitu.
Kalau lebih lanjut Pak, kenapa desa? Kenapa desa yang dijadikan satu landasan?
Nah, yang
dari institusi lain, misalnya kelurahan, kecamatan dan sebagainya.
Yang diberi kuasa oleh Sultan adalah
desa.
Diperangkat di desa.
Khusus untuk kasus itu ya Pak ya?
Ya,
baik.
Betul. Betul.
Apakah bisa
pemerintahan
diaplikasikan?
terkecil di Indonesia kan desa,
ya.
Itu yang lebih dekat dengan masyarakat.
Iya.
Nah,
Ya. So, jadi artinya ini bisa juga diaplikasikan data yang bersumber dari desa ini kepada daerah-daerah lain kah Pak? Untuk khususnya di Indonesia terkait dengan pemerintahan paling rendah di Indonesia?
Mungkin berbeda kasusnya, karena di Jogja kebetulan daerahnya istimewa. Nah, tapi kalau di daerah lain ya harus kita lihat. Kalau hutan tentu saja kita harus ke Kementerian Lingkungan Hidup dan Kehutanan mengenai status tanahnya.
Ya.
Jadi nanti dilihat ini statusnya tanah siapa, apakah masuk kalau hutan produksi bisa saja perusahaan atau bisa ke yang lain, jadi harus lebih jelas gitu.
Iya. Jadi kalau kita coba mengambil polanya ya Pak ya, polanya untuk mengetahui data yang paling valid begitu, apakah kita bisa mengacu kepada ibaratnya pemerintahan paling atau otoriti yang paling tahu begitu mengenai daerah itu. Kalau di kehutanan lingkungan hidup begitu?
Iya, betul.
Baik ya. Jadi kalau mungkin di daerah lain, mungkin desa atau kelurahan begitu itu bisa menjadi acuan data yang tertera di sana begitu Pak?
Ya, mungkin kalau di Sumatera Barat beda lagi kan.
Nagari
ya.
begitu ya?
Ya.
Baik, oke. Ya, that's the pattern in Indonesia. Do you want to add the question, Mr. Ratusi?
If I may?
Yeah,
Okay,
sure.
I think what I like to hear a lot is this the intangible values. And how did you collect these intangible values, which may not be available from village office even, or do they have data on intangible assets too, like incomes or whatever else?
Ya, bagaimana untuk intangible assets-nya Pak? Menghitungnya seperti apa?
Nah, Kalau intangible asset tentu kita harus melakukan survei langsung. Jadi kita harus tahu bahwa katakanlah kalau yang di kasus Bandara Jogja itu kita harus lihat di atas tanah itu digunakan untuk apa? Apakah untuk warung, untuk apa? Peternakan, untuk bercocok tanam. Nah, itu kita harus memperhitungkan kira-kira kegiatan apa yang ada di atas tanah yang dikuasai oleh penduduk tersebut. Nah, sehingga kita bisa memperkirakan sebulan bisa menghasilkan berapa warung ini, kira-kira ruginya akan menjadi berapa. Nah, seperti itu. Ya.
Itu masuk dalam perhitungannya ya Pak ya?
Iya, itu
Untuk
yang
intangible
kerugian
asset.
non fisik yang harus diperhitungkan, kehilangan pekerjaan, kehilangan profesi. Nah, katalah di atas itu diusahakan untuk penginapan. Akibat dibebaskan, potensi dia penginapannya hilang berapa, itu yang harus
Jadi
kita
sampai ke potential loss-nya ya
Iya,
dihitung ya?
betul,
Ya.
betul.
Do you get your answer?
Very interesting. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I think this is, if I may just add, this is a challenge
Yeah.
in any countries that I worked. And
Yes.
different countries, we use different methods because the more existing data we can use, village level or forestry department, we want to use them. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, we need to also collect some data directly
Yeah.
from the people.
Yeah.
Because like income or some intangible assets and so on, only the people will be able to tell. And no such data existing, because it keeps changing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's really a challenge to be able to identify exact scale of loss beyond physical assets.
Yeah. Thank you. So we need to get the data also from the people, yeah, who has the real data, yeah, for their condition. And next, I would like to move to Mr. Ben Elder. Yeah, Mr. Ben Elder, you have been working and dedicating your career on this very topic. What would you say based on your experience about the issue of data availability on the proper valuation and compensation of unregistered and customary lands?
Yeah, hi everybody, and really interesting question that, and thank you for the lead into that. What I'm going to say will probably cause one or two people to sit up a little bit and perhaps be a little bit critical of what I'm going to say, but it's all right talking about data, but data by itself is useless. You have to be able to understand where that data's come from. You have to be able to convert it into information and then into knowledge. And that's what valuers do. That's what valuers are good at, is to take raw data and turn it into meaningful knowledge, which then they can use in the valuation process. If the data is poor, and this is one of the challenges I've seen all around the world where we've had pretty good databases, pretty good numbers in computers or systemized data collection. But if it's out of date, if it's poor, if the information is not relevant, if it's been a forced sale or it's been a sale to a member of the family or somebody's paid over an amount, then that corrupts the outcome. And the skill of the valuer is to really understand the information and transfer it into knowledge, and then that moves forward into the valuation process. So it might sound very pedantic, and when people are struggling for any sort of information, to sort of try and segment it, it might sound very strange, but being able to do that is really important. And the second part to answering the question is embrace the international standards. We've already heard from Nick this morning about international valuation standards, but don't forget about international property measurement standards. How do you measure the property to then put the data into a database? There was some research done a few years ago where it showed that depending on the basis of measurement that you used, you could get a 25% difference in the reported space in a piece of real estate. They were all perfectly good measurement standards, but they just weren't consistent. So it means that unless you've got that consistency, then that transfer of data and information becomes much more difficult and much more challenging in the marketplace. And markets change by the minute. And so going back to a database which is 2 days old, 3 days old, may be actually really misleading. So the valuer's job is to be up to date, understand the market, be involved in the market, and then you're able to start to report market value, or perhaps looking again at the international standards. We've rather focused on market value today, but there are other bases of values contained in the international standards. So there's investment value, which is worth. So maybe we actually ought to be looking at what the worth is to individuals rather than the market value. Maybe there's a marriage value issue, which again is covered by the standards. And we just need to be a little bit clearer and a little bit more articulate about some of the terminology which we use in this space. And whether it's registered or unregistered, valuation is not supposed to be easy. It's really, really challenging. And trying to apply valuation to a policy, we need to make sure that the valuer is not abandoned to make policy as they move through a valuation process. A valuation process is really clear, and it needs to be carried out within parameters. If those parameters aren't there, then the valuer should or must go back and get that clarity before they can proceed.
Yeah. And what do you think about the ecological value that mentioned in the previous discussion before?
Yeah, I mean, there's a value to everything. We may not like the value. That's a different question. But for example, the ESG, the environmental issues are reasonably straightforward to assess. The governance issues are reasonably straightforward to assess. Social value is absolutely difficult. And that's the most challenging area that we need to get some more consistency around delivery of what we mean by social value. And it's one of those things, my first degree was in economics, and economists have talked about externalities for many, many years. And the valuers need to embrace that process of trying to bring non-market issues into the market. And it's really, really difficult.
Yeah.
But valuers are well placed to do it.
Yeah. Based on your experience, do you have any specific method how to ensure whether the data is reliable or not?
It's down to the skill of the valuer. The valuer is the person who is responsible for reporting the number, and so it's their job to actually understand the data. Even in Western economies, from the UK, we have gaps in information because the market changes. We had a little dilemma with a prime minister a few weeks ago, and she only lasted a few days. And the markets reacted to that political instability. And so the data which was available on the Monday before Liz Truss became Prime Minister, and the data which was then used on Tuesday afternoon were completely incompatible. And the valuer had to recognize and change that number. The RICS issue a guidance note on comparable evidence, and it runs through a hierarchy of the types of evidence on which you should rely. And if there's no foundation data, then it should be sentiment. And you can go out and this is what my colleague was talking about there, getting the sentiment from the marketplace. It may not be hard data. It may be data or information which says, we know nobody's buying hotels at the moment, but if the Ritz-Carlton came on the market, how much would you pay for it? And that starts to become a sentiment data. So valuers need to be really close to the marketplace.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your answer. Okay. Next, I will move to Mr. Mike McDermott. What would you say on data availability to support proper valuation of unregistered and customary land?
Yeah, thank you very much. Pretty much building on what's already been said, data, as Ben mentioned, is just the beginning. Now, what the valuer needs to sort out from is to turn that data into information. Information is a difference that makes a difference in the context. Now, the problem there is, how do you assess what makes a difference? And that only comes from a lot of experience in terms of assessing these things. So you get the information, you go to knowledge, and then you can go to understanding. And when you're talking about customary land, as was mentioned by Dr. Rahman, there are significant issues about coming to an understanding of what different knowledges mean in different contexts. So that is, to be a professional valuer, you need to understand the market dynamics in the particular area. If there is no market in there, you're still assuming parties. So we valuers are not looking at the parties actually in situ. We're looking at willing buyers and willing sellers in a market environment. So we valuers cannot give you all the answers you need for resettlement and compensation. What we can do is provide an answer as to the market relevance of different value sets that are at play. And that is then useful information in terms of finding somewhere where these people who are being displaced can then achieve the principle of equivalence in their new area. That's where we can be useful, but we can never replace a professional resettlement officer. We can simply inform them. Now, when it comes to the aspect of data, another emphasis we valuers really require is the date of the valuation that we are to be performed. So we want to see what the situation was on the ground at the date of valuation. As Ben mentioned, these things can change from one day to the next. When we have a date of valuation, that's where we report to and we report about. And if necessary, then an update can be made at a later station. But we do require that. So we need a drone to go over the area. We need to know who is in it, who is not, and all of these sorts of things. Data providers can be very useful in specific contexts of that nature. The other point is the retention of information needs to be properly organised and classified so that people can then see exactly where people were coming from at that particular date of valuation. So data is necessary but insufficient to go through the whole chain from data to information, to knowledge, to understanding, and then to skillful means of applying that understanding to the evaluation at hand. That whole process starts with data, but it doesn't end there.
Do you have any stories based on your experience, how the difficulties of data, finally you find a solution how to find the reliable data and to measure all the values?
Well, very much so. And the methodologies that we've seen before are arising from those kinds of understandings. Well, valuers go in with an attitude of I don't know, but I want to find out. In other words, we can only absorb other people's understandings of a situation with an open mind, not a closed one. And so when it comes to a new frontier of identity construction, a new frontier of the way people look at the world, it's not our job to impose our preconceptions upon that space. It is our job to understand the market-relevant dynamics in that space. And a lot of these methodologies that our previous speakers were talking about are there specifically to allow that process to unfold. Unless you put your foot in the door, you'll never get an understanding of what's in that, on the other side of that door. So the processes, the methodologies are gradually being worked through as we speak.
Yeah, Okay. Thank you for your answer. And next we will go to Professor Nur Azam Azani. From microeconomics perspective, and based on your experience as a former director of land valuation in the National Land Agency, tell us a little bit about the risks involved in the valuation of unregistered and non-customary land.
Okay, Ibu Prita, since we can use two different languages, so allow me speak in Bahasa Indonesia.
Yes,
It's easier for me.
yeah. We all have
Okay.
translation tools, ya.
Ya, terkait dengan pengadaan tanah dan land valuation, konteksnya yang pertama ini kan terkait dengan pembangunan ya. Tadi disampaikan oleh Pak Mutakin, pembangunan harusnya membuat menjadi lebih baik untuk semua stakeholder ya.
Iya.
Satu itu. Yang kemudian konteks yang kedua kita bicara kompensasi ya. Nah, terus yang ketiga, satu lagi kalau terkait dengan customary land atau tanah wilayah, bagaimana eksistensi dan sustainability dari masyarakat yang ada di situ gitu. Jadi itu harus menjadi salah satu pertimbangan, tidak hanya kompensasi, karena kalau cuma sekedar dikasih kompensasi setelah itu mereka tidak bisa menggunakan dan kemudian menjadi miskin, itu banyak terjadi itu pengalaman di beberapa tempat, termasuk di Jogja, termasuk di yang daerah Bojonegoro atau apa itu, yang mau dibikin Pertamina itu, mereka dapat duit banyak, setelah itu beli segala macam, setelah itu miskin seketika.
Iya,
gitu
sampai kita ada istilah ya, orang OKB tiba-tiba kaya, mereka berapa beli mobil begitu ya.
Exactly, what does it mean? Jadi kalau itu yang terjadi berarti proses pemiskinan. Tadi disampaikan oleh Pak Mutakin, harusnya ini bukan ganti rugi. Kalau dengan yang diceritakan Pak Mutakin, katanya mestinya ganti untung gitu.
Iya.
Ganti untung dan setelah itu mereka menjadi lebih makmur mestinya, karena yang diganti tidak hanya market value tapi non market value, bahkan intangible value pun diganti sehingga menjadi bagus. Itu yang pertama. Nah, kemudian begini, kalau mempertimbangkan antara market value dengan customary land, ini kita bicara dua hal yang berbeda. Market value itu kan based on market mechanism, fully based on market mechanism, dan market mechanism itu based on the philosophy of private property right. Sementara kalau customary land itu berbasis pada common property right. Di situ tidak ada private property right. Ini yang seringkali membuat menjadi rumit dalam proses penghitungan ganti rugi, karena kejadian di Papua misalkan, saya kira Pak Mutakin paham betul itu, dan Bu Rengganis juga paham betul bagaimana di Papua sudah diganti rugi, nanti saudaranya mengklaim lagi, cucunya mengklaim lagi, ini mengklaim lagi, jadi bertahun-tahun bandara itu selalu dipalang, ini ganti ruginya saya belum dapat. Nah, kepastian hukum itu menjadi konflik. Kenapa? Karena yang satu berpikir tentang hukum positif, yang satu lagi berpikir tentang hukum komunal, yang itu kadang-kadang tidak nyambung. Itu yang harus dicari jalan. It is not that easy. Tadi Pak Benjamin mengatakan valuation proses itu very hard, very challenging proses. I fully agree with you, Pak. Tapi itu tantangannya memang, karena kita berbicara pada dua sistem yang berbeda. Terus bagaimana risknya? Banyak sekali risknya ya. Oke, kalau terkait dengan tanah-tanah komunal atau tanah adat atau ada dua kemungkinan. Yang pertama adalah tanah ulayat atau tanah adat yang sudah terregister. Seperti yang diceritakan tadi oleh Pak Mutakin di Jogja, itu terregister dengan jelas. Kalau yang terregister mudah merunutnya.
Iya.
Bisa dijelaskan dengan mudah, ini punya siapa, yang punya siapa, yang menggunakan siapa. Even yang terregister pun masih ada risiko, Bu. Kenapa? Karena tanah yang terregister itu seringkali terfragmentasi. Sebagian dia ada di wilayahnya dalam tanda petik wilayah BPN, karena itu non-forest area. Sebagian lagi di wilayah yang forest. Kalau di wilayah forest meskipun itu tanah wilayah menjadi rumit, Bu.
Iya.
Menjadi rumit. Itu terkait dengan risiko masalah data. Belum lagi kalau yang dia belum terregister.
Iya, betul.
Ya. Tanah ulayat yang belum terregister, datanya pun nggak ada itu. Hanya klaim-klaim sepihak, klaim saya punya gini, batasnya sini, sejauh lemparan batu tuil. Tapi itu enggak tercatat, jadi menjadi lebih rumit. Memang tantangannya adalah untuk customer land yang belum terregister, itu harus diregister dulu. Suka atau tidak suka, ke depan harus diregister. Cuman
Harus
problemnya,
diregister dulu ya stepnya ya pertama ya.
Cuman memang tidak mudah meregister itu. Kalau meregister dalam program PTSL ya, mungkin teman-teman BPN bisa memberikan gambaran. Itu nanti dikhawatirkan, banyak di antara mereka khawatir menjadi tanah negara. Kalau tanah menjadi tanah negara bukan lagi menjadi tanah mereka. Itu makanya banyak wilayah, banyak tempat yang tidak pengen tanah customary land-nya mereka itu kemudian didaftarkan.
Iya, iya.
Itu pengalaman yang dari lapangan. Nah, kemudian kalau harus mendaftarkan, harus memproses sendiri mungkin perlu biaya yang menjadi pertanyaan apakah mereka secara finansial sanggup untuk itu. Gitu
Iya,
ya.
iya.
Itu risiko-risiko jangka pendek terkait dengan data ya. Dalam jangka panjang tadi sudah disampaikan juga oleh teman-teman Pak Mutakin juga menyampaikan, Pak Nur Fauzi juga menyampaikan bagaimana sustainability ke depan, bagaimana ecological risk-nya, bagaimana environmental risk-nya. Tadi Pak Benjamin mengatakan ESG, sekarang menjadi tren di mana-mana, we talk about ESG. Kenapa? Karena sustainability itu menjadi semacam kata kunci lah pada hari ini. Saya kira gitu, Bu.
Iya.
Gitu.
Ini belum lagi kalau kemudian kita berhadapan dengan konflik lahan ya Pak ya.
Exactly.
Double claim begitu dari yang masing-masing unregistered.
Iya. Itu lebih ini lagi karena pada kenyataannya juga dulu barangkali ya sebelum ada model pendataan yang sangat precise seperti sekarang, pendataan mungkin juga tidak secanggih sekarang sehingga ngukurnya juga mungkin nggak pas dan sebagainya, sehingga seringkali terjadi juga klaim karena pencatatan juga dulu tidak serapi sekarang, tapi mestinya ke depan dengan program yang ada sekarang mestinya kemungkinan itu akan pelan-pelan kita bisa kurangi ya, double claim dan sebagainya.
Nah itu dia pertanyaan besarnya Pak, memang kalau kita bicara soal risk begitu ya, data yang reliable, data yang bisa dipegang itu menjadi satu masalah. Karena itu tadi kan kalau customary unregistered land, the data not documented, there is no witness about it, and anybody can claim the land. So we need to discuss more about how to find a reliable one. What the method that can be used to find it gitu. Menurut Bapak sendiri bagaimana?
Ya gini, seperti yang saya sampaikan tadi, ini akar masalahnya karena yang satu berbasis pada private property right system, yang satu berbasis pada common property right system.
Iya.
Kayak seperti kalau kita di sini tanah itu punya sama, punya Burengganis. Orang tidak bisa ngeklaim karena itu sudah punya Burengganis. Itu namanya private property right system, gitu ya. Sementara kalau di Papua tanah ini punya siapa? Ini punya komunal, ini punya klan ini dan ini bisa diklaim sampai 7 turunan.
Iya,
Sekedar contoh misalkan kalau kita di Papua nabrak babi aja, babinya meninggal, itu yang ngeklaim banyak sekali. Dan babi itu enggak hanya babinya, nanti babi bisa beranak sekian, bisa beranak sekian, itu semua boleh diklaim dengan aturannya mereka.
Baik.
Even termasuk misalkan kita punya tanaman ya kalau di Papua, ini tanahnya Burengganis. Exactly tanahnya Burengganis misalkan ya menurut hukum adat. Tapi saya nanam durian di kebunnya Burengganis. Durian itu punya saya bukan punya Burengganis.
Iya.
Gitu ya. Nah ini yang saya bilang tadi perbedaan konsep antara hukum positif negara dengan hukum adat yang memang susah dijelaskan. Nah, bagaimana cara mencari jalan terbaik? It is not that easy. Gampang kita mengklaim, oke, kita cari jalan yang terbaik. Pada waktu dulu saya menjadi Director Land Valuation, waktu itu pertama-pertama baru kita memproses land valuation. Sebelumnya land valuation nggak disinggung, Bu. Jadi nilai tanah itu tidak menjadi core-nya BPN pada waktu itu. Pada waktu saya menjadi Director Land Valuation, yang pertama apa? Kita mulai dari yang sederhana-sederhana dulu, jangan pikirin yang rumit. Tahun 2011 dulu yang ini udah ini kita dalam tanda petik kita mulai yang sederhana dulu gitu ya. Tapi kan kita nggak bisa mulai yang sederhana terus selamanya sederhana. Kita pasti akan sampai titik kalau sekarang sudah nanti semua tanah sudah diregister, semua tanah sudah ada nilainya, yang tanah tanah yang punya privat, kita pasti akan masuk ke sana suatu saat nanti. Gimana caranya? Komunikasi antar dua arah itu harus penting sekali menurut saya. Kalau kita tidak bisa mengakomodir atau paling tidak mencari jalan tengah dengan pemilik community itu, maka yang terjadi dalam jangka panjang konflik berkepanjangan yang tidak akan pernah selesai. Makanya harus cari jalan tengah, bagaimana caranya. Disitulah peran orang-orang sosiologi, antropologi, bagaimana caranya bisa bernegosiasi, bisa ngobrol dengan mereka, dan membuat mereka-mereka yang di community itu, di tanah wilayah itu, bahwa mereka juga harus menerima kondisi bahwa hukum dunia itu perkembangannya gini loh.
Yeah,
Kalau
yeah.
enggak, ya akan tertinggal. Mungkin mereka akan selamanya jadi enklave yang kemudian tidak akan pernah bisa bersatu dengan perkembangan di luar. Saya kira
Iya.
gitu, Pak.
Semakin tertinggal dan semakin terpinggirkan ya Pak ya.
Itu yang terjadi saya kira dengan misalkan ambil contoh ya,
Iya.
kalau di Australia dengan aborigin
Dengan
gitu ya.
aborigin ya.
Ya, that's the reality. Apakah mau seperti itu? Ya
Iya.
kalau memang mereka mau seperti itu, ya monggo. Kita tidak bisa maksa. Tapi apa iya gitu ya. Rasanya kok kita kasihan juga kalau itu saudara-saudara kita juga.
Iya.
Kalau mereka tidak maju kan sayang.
Warga negara Indonesia
Exactly.
juga ya,
Gitu.
who has the same right.
Ya.
Oke, baik Pak. Saya akan beralih berikutnya kepada, I will go to Mr. Ben Elder again. What tools may be available to mitigate the risks?
Yeah, okay. It depends on the type of risk that you are considering. There are risks around the environmental issues and change. For example, if perhaps you were occupying some land near a river which would flood, there's a risk there. It's maybe a slightly different risk to a financial one in a calculation for market value, where you're trying to identify the inhibitors of receiving an income moving forward. I think it's really, again, important to recognize that valuers are looking forward. They don't look backwards. They use evidence from what is happening in the market now to predict how likely the flow of income is likely to be over a number of years moving forward. And I think it's one of the failings of the valuation profession and the public at large is that they tend to think that if you are valuing something, you are valuing something physical. So this building, for example, but actually you're not. You're valuing the rights to use. And so how those rights to use are articulated depend on the society which they come from. And then if you move into statistical testing, then there are methods around Monte Carlo theories, the sensitivity analysis, but they are all statistical bases, and they will help the valuer identify the risk, but what the valuer then does with that risk is in their skill set. So there are techniques to identify the risk, and there are pointers which will give that decision process. But going back to what Mike was saying, those risks are time-based, because the risks today are not going to be the same as the risks tomorrow. So we need to be able to really clearly articulate when we're fulfilling a regulatory function of evaluation. So what is the regulation process which is being carried out? But most people also want some advice, which is the forward look, and they want some advice about what might happen. But that's not valuation, that's advice. And valuers are very good at delivering it, but they need to be really careful about the advice part, because you're moving into the unknown. And if you're not really very careful as a valuer, you can be giving advice, but then find it gets wrapped up into the valuation, and you can become liable for that advice as if it was a regulatory prediction. So some really careful language needs to be delivered by the valuers. I think we've heard conversations around valuers being made liable for some of the numbers which they've reported, but actually they've been reporting them in good faith, but they haven't had the clarity of the policy that they're trying to deliver against. I really think there are some real challenges that we need to address between the policy objectives of organizations like the ADB, the World Bank, the Indonesian government, and then the valuation part and the compensation rules which might exist in a particular country. And there's a gap between those two processes, and those need to be understood as one of the risks involved in delivering the projects.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for your perspective. Okay, next we will go to Mr. Mike McDermott. You were involved in developing and writing both the policy guide and the manual for the UN Habitat GLTN concerning the valuation of unregistered land. Tell us the risks, especially for customary land.
Well, those risks have already been well addressed by our previous presenters. In particular, Dr. Rahman's points were that people operate from different value sets. He used the word ontology, which basically the study of being. People have certain assumptions about their life activities which work in their environment. The problem is when you remove them from those environments, you also sometimes remove them from the legitimacy of their value sets. So, for example, we come, at least I come from a market-based set of values. That is an ontology, a way to look at things. In customary land often comes from a completely different ontology from that which we valuers are used to working within. So rather than go beneath the ontology to what's called chthonic values, which we all share as fellow human beings, we need to become trans-ontological and understand that people can view the world in completely different ways to those that we are accustomed to working in our own fitness landscapes. So valuers entering in a completely different ontology need to become trans valuers, that they can then understand what's in the land for the customary people, what's in the land for the market-based people, and to be able to see just how far a market can take you in compensating for the whole sets of values that they possess that we don't. So what a valuer can provide is that particular number of an estimate of value whereby people can then be moved to another place whereby their own ontologies can continue. But we can't, that's very, very difficult. But when it comes to degrees of difficulty, there's a whole new world of difficulties that resettlement officers have. What we valuers can do is take a part of the burden from their shoulders. This is, when I was doing these books for the UN Habitat GLTN, the policy guide and the manual, the dialogue and discussions that arose from that caused me to write a book of my own, which is called Wicked Valuations. The wicked refers to degrees of difficulty, not to whether something is evil or not. It's just very difficult to address. This is an established discipline now in how to best address wicked values, wicked problems. So there are simple problems, complicated problems, complex problems, wicked problems. We are dealing in a wicked problem space. And if we try to reduce them to complicated or simple, we just make the wicked problem worse.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, you want to add the
yes,
question? Yeah, add the answer?
Yeah, the wicked problems and also the challenge of difference between private-owned lands and customary-owned land. I found this Uganda presentation very interesting in the sense that compensation is paid to the community, and then the community decide how to use about it. It's a kind of community-based approach. Now, in a way, it helps overcome the problems we're facing of the difficulties of data collection, the ontological differences between private and community ownership, and the risks related to doing whatever. Now, so because you have a community and they have their own systems, and in a way, let them decide how to use the compensation to make sure, no significant impact happens. Now, of course, the question, the risk is that whether there is any problems in the use of the compensation, if there's any very significant impact that happened to a particular community member that may not be restored or mitigated. So there's a lot of technical methodological problems there. But I think it's this approach of community-based compensation is a very interesting way when it comes to communal land.
Can I I completely endorse that, and I was very interested in the Ugandan approach, which struck me as very practical. The point is you can get lost in complexities and fall off something called a complexity cliff, whereby you don't get anything done because you're so trapped by all the complexities involved. And what the Ugandan presentation did was present a clear methodology and path towards actually getting what the purpose of this particular workshop is, to promote fairness for all and without costly delays. So I found that a very useful presentation.
Yeah, okay, thank you for your answer. Okay, we will go to question and answer because there are already many questions. The first question is, what have been the triggers for regulatory reforms so the country system is more receptive to compensating unrecognizable land claims? Yeah, you would like to answer, Pak? Ya, silakan Pak.
Ya, boleh Bu. Mungkin ini cerita sejarah lahirnya Undang-Undang Nomor 2 Tahun 2012 tentang pengadaan tanah bagi pembangunan untuk kepentingan umum, karena kebetulan saya involved di situ. Pada waktu saya masuk menjadi Direktur Land Valuation waktu itu, pertama yang saya lakukan adalah membuat peta data. Yang terjadi adalah ternyata problem pengadaan tanah itu muncul karena penolakan yang sangat besar dari masyarakat. Kenapa penolakan yang sangat besar? Karena ternyata ganti ruginya tidak sesuai harapan. Nah, begitu kita pelajari lebih jauh, ganti rugi itu menurut aturan sesuai dengan NJOP pada waktu itu ya. Pada waktu itu ganti rugi itu sesuai dengan NJOP. Waktu kita petakan lebih jauh NJOP, ternyata di seluruh Indonesia itu nilai rata-rata NJOP itu hanya 30-35% dari market value. Khusus untuk Jakarta waktu itu sekitar 60-65% dari market value. Nah, ya tentu orang enggak mau lah gitu ya. Bu Prita tanahnya harganya Rp100 diganti Rp30, mana ada yang mau. Kita berkorban untuk negara, iya, tapi kan bukan dengan memiskinkan begitu gitu ya. Itu yang orang menolak. Itu yang problem yang sangat besar pada waktu itu. Kemudian tanah itu menjadi ajang spekulasi. Kalau saya tahu informasi, misalkan ya saya orang yang tahu informasi, sementara Bu Prita nggak tahu, maka begitu tempat Bu Prita itu mau dijadikan tempat untuk pengadaan tanah untuk proyek pemerintah apapun, saya tahu 2 tahun lagi harganya mahal, saya beli dulu punya Bu Prita. Harga pasarnya 100, Bu Prita dijual aja saya beli 150. Bu Prita merasa 150 itu sudah lebih tinggi dari market gitu ya. Padahal 2 tahun kemudian menjadi 500 harganya. Nah, itu informasi itu yang kemudian menjadi trigger gitu ya. Nah, kemudian muncullah tadi yang diceritakan oleh Pak Mutakin, ganti rugi itu harusnya bukan ganti rugi, harusnya membuat mereka lebih nyaman. Nah, pada waktu itu juga muncul kejadian begini, ini bikin jalan gitu ya. Udah jadi jalan sebelah sini udah jadi 500 meter itu nggak bisa. Kenapa? Karena dia nggak mau ngelepas yang punya tanah itu. Dan itu mangkrak gitu. Ada kejadian juga mau dibikin jalan tol, sebelah sini nggak mau. Kenapa? Karena nggak mau ngelepas. Jadi muter begini. Ini kan inefisien untuk semua orang, the whole life gitu. Nah, kejadian itulah yang kemudian memaksa kita membuat peraturan Undang-Undang Nomor 2 Tahun 2012. Begitu diputuskan menjadi pengadaan tanah, maka orang nggak bisa menolak, gitu ya. Dan itu diumumkan secara terbuka, secara transparan. Ganti ruginya pun bukan NJOP, tapi ganti rugi yang benar-benar market value. Untuk tanahnya ditambah apapun yang ada di atasnya itu digantikan. Termasuk yang tadi disampaikan oleh Pak Mutakin, nilai-nilai yang sosial, kompensasi atas pendapatan dan sebagainya. Itu semua diganti dan dijelaskan dengan detail di Undang-Undang Nomor 2 Tahun 2012. Saya kira gitu.
Disitulah kemudian istilahnya menjadi ganti untung dari ganti rugi Pak waktu itu?
Kira-kira begitu. Jadi tapi ternyata belum selesai juga. Begitu dapat uang kemudian dia digunakan dengan cara nggak benar jadi miskin juga. Itu next agenda ya.
Next case ya. Bu Rengganis ingin menambahkan sesuatu, silakan.
Okay, if we talk about unrecognizable, unregistered land, ya Pak, in this case, for example, the squatter or people that occupy the land and then utilize it. Actually, we have currently the presidential decree number 62, issued in 2018 to handle the social impact that actually should be very useful for this type of occupiers. So, because the government couldn't compensate the land that is not owned by this type of occupiers, then this presidency actually comes with the compensation that could be measured based on the social impact that has been experienced by these affected people.
Okay. Thank you for your answer. Yeah, you want to add
Just to add on top of
the
this.
question?
Yeah, this Indonesia actually has this advanced regulations to recognize or at least make sure there's no very significant impact happens on squatters, on informal land occupants. I also want to, I was very interested in this example of Sri Lanka, where squatters are given, I don't know, 10 purchase, 20 purchase, I don't know how big it is really, but some minimum size of land given to squatters flatly, just to make sure there's no serious impoverishment. So people may not receive compensation that is equivalent to whatever they had. But it helps preventing impoverishment. And that also helps facilitate and expedite project implementation, because at least people are happy. People are aware that they don't have rights. But at the same time, they have their own life. Now, the project gives them a small piece of land that is enough for them to sustain, reestablish minimum livelihood to continue their life. And that really facilitates the project implementation and avoid delay. So there are many examples in the world how to handle this kind of issues. It's very interesting cases, including from Indonesia, this regulation 2018. Yeah, very interesting.
Thank you for your message. Okay, we go to the next question. How to work within legal framework to do the best possible way to value and compensate unregistered land users. What would be the first step to do this? Would you like to answer? Maybe Mr. Mike McDermott or you, Mr. Alderman first?
Okay, shall I go?
Okay, Mr. Mike first.
Sorry, yeah.
Because you both already. Okay, Mr. Mike McDermott would leave, yeah, okay, you go first.
Okay, well, one thing to bear in mind when it comes to customary land, unregistered landowners, is that markets only deal with a certain group of people. They deal with willing and knowledgeable and prudent sellers and willing, knowledgeable and prudent buyers, and both are assumed to have the motives, the means and the opportunities to express the values in that marketplace. However, if you're from a non-cash economy, where is your means of providing the amount of money to the vendor that will express your values? So you can want the land with all your heart and soul, but if you don't have the money to outbid everybody else for it, you cannot express yourself in the marketplace. And that's the core of the part of the answer to the particular question, is a recognition of that reality. And from that particular base, I'll hand over to Ben to take that answer further.
Okay.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, thank you, Mike. Again, I'm probably going to be the unpopular person here in that it's not the role of the valuer to be fair. That is not their job. It's the role of the policymakers to be fair. The valuers are there to do a job. And the question there says about within a legal framework. So if somebody is occupying land illegally, my first question would be, well, how long will it be before the authorities actually remove them? Because that immediately then gives me a framework of time which I might then use to compensate them for the loss of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. But they haven't got an inheritance right. But that depends on how we then define that issue about ownership. We tend immediately to leap to formal registration because that's probably the most reliable. But there are lots of people who occupy land legally but don't have the relevant documentation. So I think it's really important we start to delineate between people who are occupying land illegally, and therefore the legal system could remove them, and people who just haven't registered their occupation. I mean, there are great big bits of the UK which are unregistered. It doesn't mean nobody owns it. It just means that they've not been transacted since the registration process we put in place. So again, we need to be really clear about which bucket we're putting all these types of occupation into. Then we can start to devise the answer from there forward.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for your answer. Mr. Mike Wedemer, what time you must leave?
It's me.
You are Mr. Ben Elder.
Yeah,
okay, I'm sorry.
I've got a flight to get, so I need to get my taxi at 3 o'clock. So it's sitting waiting for me, so I'm okay for a few more minutes.
What? I'm sorry?
I'm okay until 3 o'clock.
Oh, you are okay at the 3 o'clock. Okay then.
So apologies.
I will go to the next question to Mr. Mutakin. What did compensation for residents of Sultan land cover? You said compensation didn't cover land loss, but did affected people become landless? Ya, Pak Mutakin, silakan.
Baik, terima kasih. Jadi seperti saya jelaskan tadi bahwa sebenarnya penghuni untuk Sultan Land ataupun Kadipaten Land itu adalah penduduk yang memang tidak punya tanah. Jadi dia istilahnya seperti menumpang.
Menumpang di tanah Sultan.
Menumpang tanah Sultan.
Baik.
Nah, sehingga meskipun menumpang tapi ada catatannya di pemerintah desa. Nah, sehingga secara legal sebenarnya tanah itu ya menjadi milik dari Sultan, sehingga kompensasinya larinya ke Sultan atau ke Paku Alam gitu. Nah, sehingga yang diterima oleh penghuni atau penduduk yang meninggali tanah tersebut hanyalah bangunan yang ada di atasnya ataupun tanaman ataupun hal-hal lain yang ada di atas tanah selain tanah gitu. Termasuk yang tadi non fisikal tadi. Cuman karena tanah memang terdaftarnya atas nama Sultan, makanya penduduk bukan berarti dia kehilangan tanah, memang selama ini dia tidak punya tanah, tapi menumpang gitu. Begitu, Bu.
Baik. Terima kasih Pak untuk penjelasannya. Pertanyaan berikutnya, how is the process of calculating assets if there are tangible cultural heritage that are not registered? Who is responsible for receiving compensation? Anybody want to answer that about tangible cultural heritage? Ibu Rengganis, you want to answer? Because in Indonesia there are many tangible cultural heritage. How to evaluate that?
Actually, I want to clarify whether that's tangible or intangible actually. Tangible cultural heritage, maybe for example.
Maybe intangible, yeah. A tangible or intangible?
Yeah.
Intangible, I think, yeah.
Intangible, they are not registered. Who is responsible? Who is eligible, maybe, to receive? Oh, who will receive the compensation?
Yeah.
Okay, I try to answer that. Okay, actually, this is back to the intangible asset that you mentioned before, that in the valuation terminology, we have this physical component that Pak Mutakin discussed it before, like the land, plants, buildings, all the tangible asset. But on the other side, we have non-physical components like the loss of jobs, loss of business, and then solatium, etc. So part of this non-physical component, we have what we call intangible asset. So I just maybe, for example, if then the government needs to expropriate an area where there is a batik production, maybe, well, we could identify that this batik actually has the material or the resources all within this area that couldn't be relocated. Yeah, this is very specific. So in this case, I would say that there will be intangible asset value that must be determined and then compensated to the, because batik is communal, yeah, community belongs to the community. So that will be given back to the community. Yeah.
That's one of the case, yeah, the batik culture in Indonesia. And anybody want to add to the answer? Okay, we go to the next question. The last question is, land acquisition is often embedded in the project and land organization. LA.
I think it's local administration.
I'm sorry?
Local administration.
Low government? Local, oh, local, I see, I'm sorry. Land acquisition is often embedded in the project and local organization arrangement is located under the project. What should we do to increase better coordination? Yeah, you want to answer that question?
This is a problem that I see very often in Asian countries, where decentralization is very often the case. Indonesia is one. I also saw the same problems challenging in Vietnam also, whereby our counterpart, for instance, with ministry at central level, but then actually land acquisition may be done by subnational governments. And they may actually apply different policies or programs. And I have seen cases where if you cross the province, you see completely different performances. So that is a challenge in terms of coordination. It's good to have a very standard approach, national level, laws, regulations, standards, that everybody has to apply. But for the World Bank project, IFI funded project, there are some gaps between national laws and regulations and our policies. So that gap may be filled with a project-specific instrument. Then that creates problems because the local government may not be very familiar with these extra measures. That creates problems of coordination, partially because of lack of knowledge, lack of experience, and so on and so forth. It is a challenge, in my view, that I have never really found the solution, except that we have to keep informing all local governments, making sure there's a good the flow of information, making sure everybody else knows what they need to do, just to make sure that there's no inconsistency between different parties. But that's a challenge, in my experience.
That's the challenge, yeah? Yes, Mr. Alderman?
Yeah, I'd like to absolutely endorse what Satoshi's just said. But one of the practical ways around is to make sure that there is good communication at an early stage.
Yeah.
And perhaps a project coordination meeting with valuers and the policymakers and the delivery agents all communicating or being involved at the very beginning, so that there is a true understanding. Many of the delays occur because problems are identified as different people approach the same problem from a different place. And having that coordination at the very beginning and having, as we would say in the UK, everybody on the same page at the very beginning, then you can start to tell the same story as you move through the project. So being able to understand the objectives from the very beginning and the problems which each party faces, and for them to be honest and open about those problems, then they can be solved. If they're quiet and they only come out 6-9 months after the project starts, they're much more difficult to deal with, because probably the budget won't meet the requirements.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your answer. We still have another question. The last question is, land acquisition is often involving multi-agencies or institution. How to improve coordination to align land acquisition planning and implementation? That's one of the issue.
Same question, same answer. The
Yeah.
only way is to make sure everybody understands.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's very important at least to have one single framework,
Yeah.
procedures that all agencies have to follow. And then comes down to the question of communication, making sure everybody understands what this framework really means.
Yeah.
But again, it's not easy.
Yeah. Ibu Rengganis, would you like to answer based on Indonesian experience?
Actually, I want to bring an issue with regard to consistencies in the understanding, because if we talk about this betterment, we agree that the affected people should continue their livelihood, and then should be in a better condition. So in the evaluation, we have this non-physical components to assess and to ensure that they will continue their life in the good quality of living. But on the other hand, we have to face the law enforcement official that have different understanding of these components.
Yeah.
Like they will think if we pay more than the certain, I don't know, this, because fair replacement value is basically value to the owner, and this is market value plus additional premium and other compensation. But from the law enforcement point of view, this could be potentially create state money loss. And this has potential to bring valuers to jail. So this is talking about consistencies. This is something that the National Land Agency, government should have same understanding and same mindset of how the compensation should be measured. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to add the answer, Pak Nur?
Ya, terkait dengan pertanyaan terakhir, saya kira dengan Undang-Undang Nomor 2 Tahun 2012 dan turunannya, itu pengadaan tanah di kita udah jauh lebih mapan ya, dibandingkan dulu sebelum. Sekarang rasanya proyek-proyek hampir tidak ada yang terlambat gara-gara pengadaan tanah dengan aturan yang terbaru. Hanya kalau mungkin mau diperbaiki menurut saya, kalau sekarang itu BPN masuknya di tengah. Waktu perencanaan awal itu di kementerian yang membutuhkan. Gitu ya, setelah mereka memutuskan baru di BPN terlibat. Nah, barangkali akan jauh lebih bagus tadi disarankan kalau coordination itu dari awal. Jadi kalau BPN sudah dilibatkan dari awal mungkin akan jauh lebih mulus. Itu barangkali.
Saya ingin komentar Anda juga ini Pak, terkait dengan rencana ke depan ini kan kita mau ada land bank. Iya, untuk kemudian menyediakan tanah untuk pembangunan gitu ya. Satu bentuk inovasi baru begitu ya dari pemerintah. Menurut Anda bagaimana? Apakah ini ada catatan yang perlu diperhatikan terkait juga dengan fairness valuation dan juga untuk unregistered and customary land yang ada di sana?
Ya kan ini program pemerintah yang sudah dicanangkan, kita mau ada land bank dan sudah diproses ya, sekarang sudah berjalan, terutama tanah-tanah yang mungkin selama ini terlantar, tanah-tanah yang kurang termanfaat dengan baik dan sebagainya ya. Ya kita tunggu aja supaya land bank ini bekerja gitu ya. Nanti kalau ada yang tidak pas ya kita kasih saran, kita kritisi, tapi biarkan mereka bekerja dulu.
Bisa jadi solusi nggak setidaknya dari rumitnya permasalahan penyediaan tanah selama ini?
Tadi sudah disampaikan Pak Benjamin, bukan perkara mudah untuk menyelesaikan permasalahan, tapi paling tidak ini sebuah niat yang baik ya. Kita sih berharap dengan ini paling tidak ada satu yang mengkoordinir kan gitu. Dengan itu mudah-mudahan sih lebih baik ya. Kalau saya sih berharap ini akan menjadi sesuatu yang lebih baik.
Yeah. Do you have any idea or any thought, Mr. Alderman? Indonesia have a new policy on land bank to provide land for development.
Yeah, again, there are various policies globally which try to meet these requirements. Again, going back to the UK, we have special development areas where the planning rules are relaxed. so they're not so rigid. But then we also have other areas like national parks, just like you, where the actual planning restrictions are much tighter. And the market responds to those. And the valuer needs to be able to interpret those regulatory requirements in an appropriate way. So valuing a piece of land in the land bank against perhaps in another area of outstanding natural beauty in Indonesia, the approach would be similar, but you have to then understand the restrictions of what the land might be able to generate, particularly in the short run against the long run. But having that supply and demand process, which tries to regulate the supply with the demand, is a really strong economic boost to the overall economy. And it provides that clarity and certainty which will help to attract the appropriate investors.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Yes, Mr. Tusi.
Yeah, just want to get back to the point of the risks related to the valuations and differences, discrepancies that you mentioned. Actually, yesterday we had a dinner with Ben, and then we spoke about the investment value, and I asked him, investment value is the value to the owner.
Yeah.
So maybe it is similar, identical to non-physical components of value. And I said, ask him, so from valuer's perspective, is there any clear standard that can be acceptable, agreeable, at least understandable to all parties? What is what constitutes this investment value? What is so that we can say we are not going beyond that, we are not less than that.
Yeah.
So then it becomes very clear in your view, right? As you said, there's no question about some corruptions or any misuse of funding, because the standard of target is clear to everybody.
Yeah.
So
you have answer for that?
I think it's something that the IVSC, and I'm part of that, need to address, is that the basis of value, investment value, is actually misleading, because it sounds like it's a commercial process, whereas actually it's not. It's about identifying worth. And I would suggest that with many of the projects that we've talked about today, having a valuation on two bases would be really helpful for all projects. So it would be an investment value for the people who are being displaced, but then a market value so that we can see the balance between the two numbers. Because the market value is really important, because there's the other side to the equation. There are the people who are being displaced, but actually there's a responsibility to society and the taxpayer on the other side of the equation. And that needs to be balanced so that the society is not paying too much money, or too big money is probably not the right word, but too much compensation to a party displaced. It should be reasonably fair on both sides. So there's a real, but having the two valuations, one to investment value, one to market value, and I perhaps even suggest a third one, which is a replacement cost element. So you've got the three numbers, and then you can start to understand the priorities of each party.
Okay. You want to add the answer, Bu Rengganis? Looks like you want to add something.
Yes, so just to
tell me I'm
clarify
wrong.
that Indonesian valuation standard actually has accommodated the land expropriation valuation since 2013.
Okay.
And then updated by 2018. Yeah. And the basis of value that we use called fair replacement value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for your information. Okay, we reach at the end of the discussion, and I will ask for closing statement. I will be back for the foundation of the question is, what is the best method to give fairness to unregistered and or customary land for their value of the land? Yeah, what is the best method? Can you answer it with a short answer for your closing statement? starting with Mr. I'm sorry, yeah, because you want to go first, maybe Mr.
I'll go
Alderman
first
first.
and then I'll disappear.
It's Mr. Ben Elder first, yeah. Okay.
Do apologise for having to leave, but I've got an aeroplane leaving fairly shortly. I think the answer to that is transparency, having a really clear process and a story which starts at the beginning and ends at the end, and no missing parts in the middle which causes disruption. So clarity, transparency, using the IVSs, using a consistent language is really, really important.
Yeah, clarity. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's part of the communication is very important. Yeah, clarity. Yeah, for the clear message. And Mr. Mike McDermott.
Well, yes, and obviously I endorse what Ben had to say there. The other point is what we were saying right at the beginning. We need to go through the whole process, data, information, knowledge, understanding, skillful application. Without the understanding of what markets can deal with and what values they cannot deal with, and to what degree markets can address these different values, then we aren't optimally serving the role that we valuers need to play in informing resettlement officers about just what can and cannot be achieved by the market value. The point is we need to have the affected parties as well off after the whole process as they were before at a minimum. And the methodologies need to ensure that as well as can be done at the time.
Okay, thank you. Let's give a big applause to Mr. Ben Elder before and Mr. Mike McDermott. Thank you. And how about you, Mr. Nur?
Ya, seperti tadi kita sepakati, ini bukan pekerjaan gampang ya. Ngitung kompensasi ini bukan pekerjaan gampang, pekerjaan yang sulit dan bahkan berat sekali. Tapi kita harus mencari jalan tengah yang terbaik memang, karena memang dibutuhkan dari dua sisi ya. Kata kuncinya tadi Pak Ben mengatakan fair dan terbuka ya. Saya ingin menambahkan satu lagi, kalau untuk kasus Indonesia menurut saya kepastian hukum. Jangan sampai kasus yang tuntutan berulang-ulang itu terjadi sehingga nggak pernah beres. Saya kira tiga itu, fairness nomor satu menurut saya penting sekali, terus kemudian transparansi itu penting, dan kepastian hukum saya kira.
Iya, baik. Terima kasih. Fairness, transparansi, dan kepastian hukum itu amat penting. Berikutnya Ibu Renggani, silakan.
I would see from different angle. I think prior to the work done by valuers, actually there is a study, right? Feasibility study that involved the socio-economic assessment. And most of the time this study is just put as formality. And with regard to the customary land, that is something that is very, very important to be assessed. And then this will identify the factors that then in the valuation will be considered as a more like the physical components. But if we do not have a proper socio-economic or plus now the ESG study, then valuer will not have the tools to then have put the consideration on these socio-economic factors. So that's something that should be done properly.
Okay, last but not least, please.
Thank you. Well, it's a tough question, of course, and there's no clear answer that you can apply across the board anytime.
Yeah.
Just want to pick up what you said of this legal certainty. That's a very important one in order to make sure everybody is aware, clear, what needs to be done, and so on. But at the same time, I would rather emphasize the certainty part rather than legal part. Because, for instance, the Jogja case, yes, people didn't have the legal rights, so they were not landless, legally speaking. But they had life also there. They had some livelihood that they had on the land that they occupied. Then the question, for instance, some examples from Sri Lanka, Uganda, of some kind of approaches that is standardized as a way to make sure nobody really got impoverished to the extent that they become too poor. That may create certainty about what needs to be done on these difficult issues. May not be as certain as is inscribed in the law, but at least it may be able to help ensure a certain certainty to make sure some fair treatment be done on land occupants. But at the same time, I want to get back to Ben said, which this other side of the coin is the state or the public. Just giving money as much as we want, as much as they want to informal occupants is not fair to taxpayers either. So again, this example of Uganda, Sri Lanka may be interesting because there's some minimum measures to make sure there's no serious impoverishment. So that may be something that taxpayers are happy to cover. And then there are some certainties that, okay, this is what's going to happen. So there's no changes each time a new project is implemented in different parts of the country. But again, it's a challenging issue. And we're really grappling on this issue. That's why we had this international conference on this particular topic.
Yeah, thank you. Let's give a big applause to all the speakers. Thank you so much. Yeah, this is the end of our discussion. This is a complex issue, very challenging, yes, indeed. But we are here to learn, and I believe that we are learning from many experience delivered by the speakers from many countries, and also experience from the consultant before and also the authorities. So I hope we hear all of that lesson with open mind. So after these seminars, maybe we could find another best way or solution to give fairness for the owners of the unregistered and customary land. So thank you once again. Good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you once again, all the speakers and moderator for a remarkable and interesting, insightful discussion. And to Bapak Ben Elder, safe trip. Thank you for being here. Oke, Bapak Ibu sekalian, kami ingatkan apabila ingin mendownload materi yang ada pada conference hari ini, kami persilahkan untuk scanning barcode yang ada di layar Anda, ya, ada di layar Anda, yang tadi juga sudah terlihat di layar utama juga, ya. Silahkan di-scan. Atau kalau misalnya mendapatkan kendala, silahkan ke website werkudara.group/materi. Sekali lagi ke website werkudara.group/materi, atau bisa di-scan langsung di barcode yang telah tersedia. Kami juga mengingatkan, before we move to the next session, we'd like to remind you again for all the participants who are interested to obtain e-certificate for participating in this conference, do not forget to input a token number in attendance form in your LMS account to be able to access your e-certificate. The token number 011222. Bapak Ibu yang ingin mendapatkan e-sertifikat, jangan lupa token numbernya adalah 011222. Langsung saja dimasukkan di daftar hadir pada akun LMS. Baik, sebentar lagi kita akan terhubung secara online dengan pembicara berikutnya. In a moment we will be connecting with our speakers for our next program, our next agenda, virtually. Okay, we're still waiting for the preparation. The next session will showcase and discuss technological advances in land use mapping and land registration, cadastral recording, and the benefits for effective land valuation and acquisition compensation procedures. These technological advances has opened up new opportunities to capture and to store information on land use that is accessible to multiple agencies, and allow better understanding on the scale and dimension of the challenge in compulsory acquisition, particularly in the context of unregistered and customary land. As we all know, ladies and gentlemen, a good land administration and geospatial data is the key to understanding the land acquisition and valuation challenge. This session will be presented by RICS and supported by the UK Land Registry, Ordnance Survey GB, and ESRI with the title Adoption of Technology as an Option for Unpacking the Issues. We'll be presenting via online. We will have Anthony Back, Land Administration Specialist, Data Scientist and Concept Architect. And also will be joining us online, Frank Pichel, Land Information Specialist, and also Dave Stowe, Enterprise Architect at Ordnance Survey. Okay, are the speakers here? Are the speakers connecting? Connected? Already connected? Okay. Before we begin the presentation, I would like to invite once again to the stage Mr. Satoshi. Mr. Satoshi to lead, to moderate the... Okay, you're here. Okay. Could you please? I will hand the stage for you, Mr. Satoshi. Thank you.
Mask off? It's easier to talk. Hello everybody, welcome back from a very short coffee break. And welcome Anthony and Dave. It's connecting from the UK, I believe. They will talk about some very interesting IT innovative technologies that's going to enhance or improve land administration processes, but at the same time would help strengthen transparency in land acquisition processes. So, welcome Frank and Anthony. Floor is yours. Are you ready to start presentation?
I can't share my screen at the moment, so that will be slightly awkward. And I don't believe Frank has arrived yet. I can share my screen.
There we go.
Okay, is that coming through?
I can see your slide, Ant. Can everybody see the slides there?
Satoshi, can you see the slides in the room? I think you can, looking at the video.
Yes. Okay, yes, we can see the slide. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you very well. Maybe it's better you speak loud a little bit, because your voice is not very clear.
Oh, okay. Satoshi, am I coming through loud and clear?
It's good now.
Okay, that's good. In that case, I will start and we'll let Ant pick up in a moment. So firstly, thank you very much for allowing us to attend this conference and giving us time to speak. And I'm sorry we can't be there in person, as I'd love to visit your country. What we want to do today is just take a few moments to discuss the rights that are recorded for land as part of understanding the land and as part of enabling the valuation of land when compensation is being considered under positions of compulsory purchase or when the value of the land needs to be understood for other valuation purposes. What we see is that there is a continuum of land rights that ranges from the legally enforceable rights people have over their land, their ownership of it, their right to use it, through administrative rights that are recognized, and social rights and less tangible rights that need to be recognized when fully understanding the land. And during this short presentation, we're going to focus, to begin with, on the legal aspects of the land when it comes to registration. And we're going to consider what are the advantages, the advances in technology have provided us now with the, sorry, I'm getting a huge echo, so I'm just going to try and just adjust my headset slightly. That's better. What the advances in technology provide in terms of being able to register those rights. So if you just want to move on to the next slide, Ant. So we've seen a massive imperative for change that comes for traditional land authorities around the world, driven mainly by users' expectations that have been set by their interactions with platforms such as Facebook and Amazon, the amazing technology advances that have taken place in the last few years. We have seen the things that impact the way people engage with their land and engage with their governments in terms of the mega trends of urbanization and climate change. And of course, the governments themselves want to place new demands on their land authorities to make the land market better. So if you go on, Ant. Thank you. So there's been massive disruption in the technology space, both in terms of technologies related to surveying and the database technologies that are used to allow the rights that are registered with land to be recorded. And what we have seen in our engagement with land authorities around the world has been that as people transition from traditional paper systems, or when people are trying to put in place land registration for the first time, we see a natural evolution of the data models that people use throughout as they mature. So as people move from quite simple records of rights, often articulated on paper, through to more highly codified database models that allow better automation and an improved query, through to models that will be fit for the future as new needs come along. We see the land administration domain model as being a kind of a common model that can be applied across these, but the actual physical data models that reside in databases mature over time. There's been a tremendous rush to design the perfect data model for your country that can take account of all the kinds of rights that may ever be recorded, and then attempts to transform data that currently exists in either old databases or on paper to that perfect model. And this is a huge effort, and it also it makes the quality of original data is very difficult, is quite hard to unwind. And it results in a huge amount of effort and a long period of time passing prior to being able to go live with some new system relating to land administration. So what we'd propose is that rather than trying to move to this perfect data model immediately, that in order to gain value very early in the process, and in order to allow jurisdictions to move rapidly to a point where they have an effective registration of land in their country, is to in fact accept that the data model will evolve and start by doing the minimum transformation necessary in order to create some digital representation of the rights on the land, and then over time allow that model to be evolved incrementally as the technology enables it, allowing the move to a better codified model on a title by title basis, and over time to a point where you can eventually retire the original system and move to the point where you have a much better model available to you. Okay. Taking this kind of approach of a deliberately allowing evolution of the data model allows you to take advantage of having a digital rights registration system with minimal data transformation early in the process, and allows you to get to a point where you have a digital system, even if many of the rights are still articulated in paper scans, and then move to a position where you can refine that model over time and move to new models, but do it on a title by title basis, not trying to do an en masse transformation. I'm going to hand over to Ant for the next part of this.
Thank you very much, Dave. I'm going to start to unpack some of the things about a land register. And essentially, no matter what model you use, a land register represents a structured index in which different bits of data can be linked and shared and exposed in different ways. But land registers themselves are part of a land administration ecosystem. So the data can be indexed alongside other data. And this data can be formal, i.e. accurate, assured and authentic, and held, for example, by other government agencies. Or it could be informal. This is increasingly digital and increasingly open. So we're seeing this open, linked realm of data. And so within this environment, ownership data can be linked with formal and informal data representing tangible and intangible attributes. And this allows policymakers and reusers to start to derive new products to aid their own processes and work patterns. Standards support interoperability and reuse of data, and of particular importance to the land domain is the LADM, ISO 19152, and this supports the structuring of parties who have rights which are framed in land. And through the ISO standard, this also supports digital transactional change, so how we deal with transfers of parties, variations of land, and the subdivision of rights and rights relationships. But as Dave has already pointed out, this data needs to be managed and maintained. Data quality should be evaluated and improved on a fit-for-purpose basis. Now, while technology can produce better data, change should only be implemented when clear social and legal impacts have been identified. Now, we started out with this model representing rights, but we need to reinforce that when a need has been identified, then the social and administrative rights can be formalized more effectively. But it's the understanding of these social and administrative rights, particularly in terms of how communities understand them and communities value them, which is of significant importance. And this is where I hope I'm going to be able to hand over to Frank, who will be picking up on the community and valuation side of this session. Hello, Frank, are you here? That leaves us a little bit of a quandary. Satoshi, have you been able
Frank
to get in
may not be
contact with
online, so he may be disconnected or dropped. Are you able to continue?
I'm sorry, but I don't, we come from separate organizations, and Frank is providing that kind of communal evaluation piece. Our element has very much been focused on the issues of technology change and how land registers can operate within that ecosystem. And so the sharing of data between formal agencies. But we can carry on in terms of any issues that the room might have on those topics.
That's okay, probably. Just we can continue if Frank is not available. Just having seen your IT solutions and designs, two things come up my mind because I tried to develop some digital database linked to an app for use on the land acquisition processes, so that whoever go to project sites for data collection, participate in surveys, are able to enter data immediately into the app that have been connected to the main system. The two challenges I faced, one, how to make sure any changes are reflected in the system. developing a database or system is easy. Well, it's not going to be easy, but in a way it's relatively easier than maintaining that. So when it comes to database, very important to have garbage in, garbage out, making sure valuable data keep updated up to the changing reality on the ground. How do you make sure your system is adaptive to changing reality on the ground? That's my first question. Second question is privacy, data privacy. That the more data we can centralize and digitize and stored in the government systems, including some things related to property rights or social values even. There's a question of data privacy. How would you address this question of data privacy? That's my second question. Are you able to handle this?
Let me address your first question regarding maintenance of the database. What we have found is that I guess there are two aspects to this, and the first aspect is that having recorded what the reality on the ground is like, both spatially and legally, you must have in place an appropriate process to allow people to transact on their land against the system and record the results of that transaction in the system to create new versions of the title that's been recorded against the property. That is mostly an administrative problem. From a technology perspective, creating controlled change around the data in the database is a well understood problem technically, but putting in place the right legal and administrative process to ensure that people always transact using the land authority rather than in whatever their traditional process may have been is probably the biggest piece of social change required. And do you want to just pick up on that from a legal perspective?
Yeah, I think my point to add on to that one is it's not just about that registration of rights, it's also ensuring that there is a place within the register to pose disputes and challenges to the register, and that these are handled in a transparent basis. Because the whole point of a register is that it represents social credibility, and that people need to believe that the register is a true reflection of the social expectations. And if people have a problem with that register, then they should be able to challenge it, and it should be addressed in a way which it reflects the social norms.
But I guess there's second part to your question, or the second part to my answer perhaps, is that it is absolutely the case that over time, the rights you will wish to record against the land and the complexity of the tenure types that you will wish to use and the way you will wish to represent the spatial aspects of the property that is being recorded, these things will change. And you must ensure that your technology system does not lock you in to a particular legal framework or a particular way of policy working, and enables you to change and grow and mature over time, as it will definitely be the case that legislative change or social change or just simply the maturity of the jurisdiction or how urbanized it is, these things will cause change that you must be able to accommodate within the technology system without having to replace it, rip it out and build a new one, for example.
I'd also like to pick up on Satoshi's second point in terms of data privacy. Data privacy is a huge issue, particularly when we start to talk about linking data into the kind of land administration ecosystem that I was presenting a few moments ago. And this is broadly being addressed by legislative processes. You have the General Data Protection regulations throughout Europe, GDPR, and there is what's the best way to describe this? The difficulty with this area is that each jurisdiction and nation is going to have to embrace it on their own individual terms to represent how they, as a nation or as a group of nations, respond to privacy issues. The danger from a data point of view is how you can start to use inferencing techniques to fingerprint individuals even when you start to obfuscate the data. So you hide names or you just use identifiers. But you can very easily start to identify personal details by just saying, I have your address and your hair color, I know who your parents might be, and therefore I can identify the exact individual, and I can start to I can then start to infer other relationships through to other databases. So these are something that needs to be understood and I think mitigated at that data linking point. And this is emerging technology. These are things where the legal systems have yet to catch up with the state of the technological architecture.
Yeah, thanks. If I may, let me challenge you, because when it comes to data privacy, it comes down quite a lot on the confidence that people have in the system. And that confidence doesn't come only from the technology perspective. It's the way how the technology is put to use. And then any leakage that may happen are appropriately addressed. How do you make sure such more institutional system, legal, institutional, administrative, put in place to make sure and support this technological development in terms of protecting data privacy?
I think in many respects this comes down to having solid governance within your organization and taking data privacy seriously. I think some of the accords that are held within things like GDPR are that when you're collecting data, you are only allowed to use it within prescribed circumstances within your business operation, and you cannot reuse it for any purpose outside of that remit. And I think that's a good starting position. However, I think the problem really starts to occur when you move beyond an individual institution and that information is shared between institutions, and where the sum of the whole might be greater than the individual parts, and your ability to start to undertake inferencing is dramatically improved. And that's where there's quite a bit of grey in terms of how we can start to reuse the information and what information can be legitimately inferred. Dave, do you have anything extra on that topic?
Again, this is, I mean, though there are many, of course, technical solutions to securing the system against inappropriate access, in the end, the real problem is absolutely a legislative and governance problem that people are it's very easy to bribe people to reveal data in the system that they're not supposed to do. It is often possible to, as Ant has said, to determine personal information about a person by analysis of data that is available. And these are difficult problems for all governments to try and solve. What is the case is that with things like the General Data Protection regulation, the GDPR regulation across Britain and Europe, is that the penalties for revealing data are huge and hugely damaging to an organisation if they were to be prosecuted under the legislation. And this has led to organisations being quite rigorous about ensuring staff are well trained and well versed and fully understand the implications of inadvertently revealing personal information about their customers. But it is without doubt a very difficult area, and it is absolutely not a technology problem. It is absolutely a governance problem.
Thanks. Just let me remind everybody, both present here and online, to register your questions through Slido. We have received several questions already. Are you able to see the questions on the screen, or should I read it out?
I'm going to need you to read them
Maybe
out.
we can start with the first one. This is about the data privacy on the data stored in the cloud. I expected this question.
Well, okay. So public cloud vendors, so the AWSs and Googles and Microsoft Azure cloud providers of the world, their job is running a secure data center. It's what we pay them to do. It's a thing they do exceptionally well. And generally, they have greater expertise in operation of a secure data center than you would be able to create internally within your organization. And as such, they are very good at running a data center, and an appropriately architected system can be completely secure within the cloud. You do have a legislative problem in that the location of your data may be there may be something enshrined within the law of your country that prevents the data you have within your organization from leaving the country. And this is not uncommon at all. It's very common that, particularly within a land authority, the law will say that the register must reside inside the country, and therefore you will need to identify a suitable cloud provider that has some presence within your jurisdiction. The alternative, of course, is to not use one of the public cloud providers, but to use another provider. And it is quite common that within any particular country there will be expertise in providing cloud or cloud-like services that are physically resident inside the borders of your country, and as such allow you to maintain sovereignty over the data, which is much harder with public cloud. However, I suspect that over time, as we see the use of the public cloud becoming steadily more and more popular, that we will see much more private data going in there, as people recognise that there simply isn't really a security issue with that data, assuming your system is appropriately architected. And I have to say, it is easy to make a system that is insecure in the cloud, and making it secure is definitely a skill that you need to consider quite explicitly.
Interesting.
I think the only thing I would add to that is issue with safe harboring, in that the cloud isn't just one legal environment. It is made up of different jurisdictions within which different agencies can call on the data if it is stored in their area. So, for example, the EU, if it's using some services, can just mandate that it is stored on EU-based environment, so it cannot be, that data cannot be legally accessed by a third-party jurisdiction. And so, as much as you may have you want to have a private cloud for an individual nation, different geographic areas can set up their own safe harboring schemes.
Thanks, interesting. One more question. How does your IT-based system capture the multiplicity or data or reality on the ground? I mean, for instance, social values, for instance. That may take multiple forms, whereas your data system may only have to have a limited number of data fields. But then the actual number of data that need to be collected and the form in which this data, the values take, may be many, a lot more than what the data field can capture.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think this is where you're seeing the tension between the formal and the informal, and the fact that starting to understand how to produce metrics around which you might start to put valuation indices is hard. A traditional land register deals with somewhat more, not completely binary, but less shades of grey, shall we say. Sorry, the echo I found quite distracting. So I think the problem there is how you start to build around the different systems that allow you to put policy or valuation frameworks in place that incorporate a range of different intangible or tangible data sets. And so it's that kind of that policy or valuation methodology which is itself transparent and understood, and then can be applied against information that is more formally registered in the land register, for example.
Okay, I'm going to take a technology slant to that question, as the words fields in a database were used. The main thing that we have observed when looking at the way databases need to be structured in order to successfully capture the wide variety of complexity in what is the reality on the ground, is the main thing we have observed is that you should not tie yourself to a fixed model for the data that is defined upfront and is then fixed forever. As that approach will absolutely result in you discovering that there is something you wanted to record about the land that is now hard to record because there isn't a field in the database to put it in. The approach that we have taken with this is that we have adopted a schemaless NoSQL database, and we've been using the ability to define the schema in a quite arbitrary way, and then allowing that schema for the database to be evolved over time to create new versions of the schema, and allowing data that was recorded in an earlier version to be migrated up to a later version of that schema when it becomes a point in time that there is some reality of rights or the spatial aspects of the land that need to be recorded that could not be accommodated within the old schema. And this approach we feel will be successful in enabling you to avoid this problem of fixing a data model and then discovering it does not accommodate something that you wish to record about the land. Whether that thing that you wish to record about the land is a formal, legally enforceable right, or is some intangible social aspect that you wish to record for the purposes of understanding the land more fully.
Thank you. This, I think, is the last question. Actually, it's related to what you have just said. In the context where data remains an issue because of incomplete, outdated data, including on social data, social values, how do you see the use of basis data for informing land acquisition processes? How much, because this conference is primarily about land acquisition processes, and how you think your digital system help enhancing transparency, but also in improving efficiency in land acquisition processes?
Part of this is related to the management and maintenance issue of your data. And I think, as we described in the presentation, that should really be addressed on a fit-for-purpose basis, not led by the technology itself, but by the impact of data improvements in terms of outcomes. So, if you're looking for a better valuation model, then you look at ways in which you can improve data incrementally that leads into that valuation process. I think also as a somewhat of a bit of an extra point against the kind of the database element, this to me is where the ecosystem is quite important. Because within that ecosystem, you are finding a whole range of new attributes which you can link through to your ownership data. And so it doesn't necessarily become a problem for the land register, it becomes a problem for the whole land administration community through joined up and linked data in that ecosystem. And so there is a certain element of ensuring that we have reform within that community so that we can start to share data more effectively, and that it is maintained and refreshed at a level which is fit for the purposes that people want to use it for. And so that requires a lot of communication, a lot of coordination, and potentially reform across the sector.
I guess also it's worth picking up that data is of poor quality. It is unavoidable that you will have data within your system, within the data you have collected, that is not correct. It is incorrect. It is, as the question says, incomplete. It is outdated. It is simply wrong. And it is critical that within the systems you have that you mark the quality, that you assess the quality of the data, and you mark the quality of the data and you use that data appropriately, understanding the quality of it as part of the processing that you carry out on the data. It's a fool's errand to try and make all the data that you collect absolutely perfect, and you would be much better spending your time creating mechanisms to deal with poor data rather than try to eliminate it. It is certainly the case that you should also consider the different uses of the data. So where the data you record relates to some kind of legally enforceable right over a piece of land, then that would definitely be something you'd want to try and ensure strongly was correct. Where the data is informative and supports some process where you are averaging out across a piece of land, then in that case you can accept lower quality data and simply ensure that your statistical processes that you apply to it know the quality of the data and allow you to eliminate error on a kind of on a generalizing basis. But trying to make all the data perfect is impossible.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anthony and Dave. Clearly, there's a lot of technological improvements that we have to learn, and I think it's going to continue to evolve, so we need to keep our eyes on you guys, how you're going to develop the technologies and how we can use this technology in our own business, everyday business. So thank you very much. Mr. Anthony Beck and David Stowe from Ordnance Survey. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Satoshi, for moderating this session. Ladies and gentlemen, such a informative and interesting presentation and information. However, we have reached to the end of our program for today. To conclude today's conference, we would like to invite the Director for Land Valuation and Land Economy of the Directorate General of Land Acquisition and Land Development of the Ministry of Agrarian Affairs and Spatial Planning, National Land Agency of the Republic of Indonesia. Please welcome Mr. Herjon C.M. Panggabean to deliver his closing remarks.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat sore dan salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Yang terhormat Operation Manager for the World Bank in Indonesia and Timor Leste. Yang terhormat Asia Director for International Valuation Standard Council. Yang terhormat Bapak Sekjen, mungkin hadir secara virtual, Bapak Irjen, Bapak Dirjen Pengendalian dan Penertiban Tanah dan Ruang, para staf ahli menteri, dan para pejabat tinggi madya di lingkungan Kementerian ATR BPN. Yang saya hormati para pembicara, panelis konferensi, moderator, Ibu Prita mungkin sudah pulang. Yang saya hormati Bapak Ibu dari Badan Pelaksana Bank Tanah, pejabat tinggi Pratama, dan para kepala kantor wilayah BPN Provinsi seluruh Indonesia yang hadir secara virtual, para kepala bidang pengadaan tanah dan pengembangan pertanahan, pejabat tinggi Pratama, para kepala kantor seluruh Indonesia. Yang saya hormati perwakilan dari Kemenko Perekonomian, Kementerian PPN Bappenas, Kemenkeu, Kemendagri, PUPR, KLHK, KSP, Elman, perwakilan dari Timor Leste, Badan Usaha, Asosiasi Profesi MAPI. Tadi ada senior kita Pak Hamid Yusuf, lalu ada Ibu Rengganis, Pak Mutakin, Pak Dedi tadi ada juga, Ibu Alda dan teman-teman yang tidak saya sebut satu persatu. Mohon maaf Ibu Dirjen mewakilkan kepada kami karena Ibu Dirjen sekarang masih di DPR RI rapat bersama dengan Parlemen. Bapak dan Ibu hadirin yang saya hormati, kita panjatkan puji syukur kehadirat Tuhan Yang Maha Esa yang telah melimpahkan rahmat, taufik dan hidayahnya kepada kita semua, sehingga kita semua diberi kesehatan jasmani dan rohani untuk dapat mengikuti International Conference on Valuation and Compensation of Unregistered and Customary Lands sampai akhir acara. Bapak Ibu hadirin yang saya hormati, pada kesempatan yang berbahagia ini izinkan kami menyampaikan rangkuman penyelenggaraan International Conference on Valuation and Compensation of Unregistered and Customary Lands sebagai berikut. Yang pertama, konferensi telah dilaksanakan secara hybrid selama 1 hari full, dihadiri secara offline 115 orang, by Zoom 702 orang, YouTube 236 orang, dan juga lewat live Facebook. 2. Kegiatan dilaksanakan antara lain sambutan dari Bapak Nicholas Konialidis selaku Asia Director for International Valuation Standard Council, Ibu Bolorma Amga Bazar selaku Operation Manager for the World Bank in Indonesia and Timor Leste, dan pembukaan acara oleh Ibu Embun Sari, Dirjen Pengadaan Tanah dan Pengembangan Pertanahan, mewakili Bapak Menteri Kementerian ATR BPN. Pemaparan narasumber dari Indonesia oleh tenaga ahli Menteri ATR BPN tentang studi kasus tanah tidak terdaftar dan tanah adat ulayat di Indonesia dan Masyarakat Penilai Publik Indonesia MAPI tentang penilaian tanah tidak terdaftar dan tanah adat tanah ulayat di Indonesia. Pemaparan tentang penilaian tanah tidak terdaftar dan tanah adat ulayat dari Institution of Surveyors of Uganda, studi di Uganda, Asian Development Bank, studi kasus di Nepal, dan World Bank, studi di Sri Lanka. Diskusi panel interaktif pembelajaran dari studi kasus yang dipaparkan narasumber terkait keberhasilan dan tantangan dalam penilaian dan kompensasi tanah tidak terdaftar dan tanah adat tanah ulayat. Fokus diskusi meliputi ketersediaan data, risiko, betterment, social value, dan intangible asset. Pengadaan tanah tidak terregistrasi dan tanah adat adalah isu yang sangat kompleks. Peran dan kolaborasi berbagai ahli untuk memahami keadaan di lapangan menjadi sangat penting, termasuk untuk memahami kondisi sosial, ekonomi, dan histori budaya dari masyarakat dan tanah yang diperlukan untuk pembangunan tersebut. Kegiatan ini harus dilakukan dengan baik. Dari berbagai negara, kerangka hukum yang dapat melindungi proses valuasi dan kompensasi sangat mendukung proses pengadaan tanah menjadi lebih baik, adil, dan demokratis. Koordinasi di antara kelembagaan terkait dan juga di dalam pengampu atau pihak yang membutuhkan tanah menjadi sangat penting untuk memastikan adanya integrasi antara perencanaan dan pelaksanaan rencana pengadaan tanah. Diskusi dipandu oleh moderator profesional dengan panelis dari perwakilan Kementerian ATR BPN, World Bank, MAPI, Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, dan konsultan internasional tentang penilaian dan kebijakan pertanahan. Demo dari Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, adaptasi teknologi terkini dalam pemetaan dan pendaftaran tanah guna mengurai tantangan penilaian dan pengadaan tanah. Resume konferensi hari ini adalah sebagai berikut. 1. Memberikan kompensasi berdasarkan ajas keadilan dalam penyelenggaraan pengadaan tanah bagi pembangunan untuk kepentingan umum merupakan suatu tantangan besar karena harus menjamin pemulihan kehidupan, bahkan peningkatan kualitas hidup suatu individu atau masyarakat yang terdampak. Yang kedua, pembayaran kompensasi sebaiknya dipertimbangkan aspek sosioekonomi tidak hanya menilai dari segi infrastruktur fisik tanah dan yang menempel di atasnya saja, namun harus mempertimbangkan aspek sosialnya. Yang ketiga, dibutuhkan komitmen seluruh aspek stakeholder agar hak-hak masyarakat adat dapat diakui. Untuk itu dibutuhkan adanya komunikasi antara para ahli, pemerintah, pemangku kebijakan, dan masyarakat. Bapak Ibu yang saya hormati, selanjutnya kami ucapkan terima kasih pada Bapak Ibu narasumber, panelis, moderator, peserta, dan rekan-rekan dari Bank Dunia dan Kementerian Atr BPN yang telah mengikuti dan menyelenggarakan acara ini. Semoga konferensi hari ini dapat memberikan pembelajaran yang dapat meningkatkan pemahaman kita semua dalam upaya untuk mewujudkan pengadaan tanah bagi kepentingan umum yang lebih adil bagi semua pihak. Demikian hal-hal yang dapat kami sampaikan, dan secara resmi konferensi ini kita tutup. Terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom. Om Santi 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 Om. Thank you very much for all participants. See you on next question. Thank you.
Thank you, Bapak Herjon, for your closing remarks. And the closing remark also marks the end of this conference. Ladies and gentlemen, I need to remind you, you can download all the materials by scanning the barcode shown on your screen, or simply go to werkudara.group/materi through your browsers. And also we'd like to, on behalf of the organizers and the partners of the policy event, we would like to express our gratitude for all the speakers and the moderators and also the participants of today's conference. We appreciate your contribution and time for sharing the knowledge and experiences with us during the session. And also to our distinguished guests and participants, both in this conference room and also those who joins us online. Thank you very much for your active participation. Once again, we'd like to remind for the e-certification, final check-in is now. You can, before we close this event, we would like to remind again all participants who wants to get the e-certificate, to obtain a e-certificate to participate in this conference, please do the final check-in with the same token, 011222. Silahkan langsung melakukan final check-in sebelum acara ini kami tutup untuk mendapatkan e-sertifikat. Tokennya adalah 011222. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much and give a big round of applause for today's conference. See you next time. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.